The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
This is certainly not the first January that the local tackle football team has been in the national conversation. But the conversation has never been like this. It's always about who's going to be the next coach. Are they going to be able to find a quarterback? Who are they taking at the top of the draft? Wow. This is incredible. And it came out of nowhere. And you know what? It kind of feels like we weren't prepared for this. I don't think anybody went into the season thinking that they would be one of four teams left and we'd be talking about the possibility of going to the Super Bowl, which I think is real. I think this team is going to go to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. And I am not a glass half full guy. I just am not. But there's something happening here. And Barry Zerluga's got a column today in the Post talking about divine intervention. He's got his tongue firmly planted in his cheek. But what he does is he plays the what-if game about what if this happens and what if that happens? And would we have gotten to this point if such and such hadn't have happened? And even if they had drafted Joe Burrow. In fact, why don't we just roll into that? I was going to get to this later in the show, but let's start off with this because I think it's something we've all been maybe thinking about and maybe talking about with our friends. As he says, it's almost as if there was some sort of divine intervention at work. And he goes through the bad things that happened and how they ultimately turned out to be good things, like when Dan Snyder pushed then-coach Jay Gruden and the front office to take Ohio State quarterback Dwayne Haskins with the 15th pick in 2019, even though, and you've heard Jay Gruden say this, they didn't want him. They looked at the tape, and they said, that's not the quarterback who's going to help us. But he took him anyway because Snyder's son had gone to the same high school, Bullis, that Haskins went to. I don't know if they overlapped or if they knew each other, but it was the local thing. It was Snyder, trying to sell tickets with a guy. And most people didn't know really he was local. He played at Ohio State. He had committed to Maryland, but when Randy Edsall got fired, he changed his commitment to Ohio State and was good, but inexperienced. He played only 1 year as the starter and came out, and there was trouble right away. When he tweeted out that he wasn't the first player taken, first quarterback. I mean, Daniel Jones was the first one, and he said the league done messed up. And then what we heard about his work ethic and the things that he did that were irresponsible, like during COVID, pictures of him at a party without a mask and things like that. And it was awful. And it was tragic. He was cut by Ron Rivera before the end of his second season, played a year in Pittsburgh as a backup, and then tragically was killed in an accident after that year. But Barry writes, had the Haskins experiment gone differently, might Snyder and or Rivera still be in Washington, and might Harris, Peters, Quinn, and Jayden Daniels be someplace else? I don't know. I mean, I think the ownership change would have happened anyway. I think that would have happened. I think Snyder was pressured into it. The congressional investigation, the reporting by the Washington Post. I mean, there were just too many walls caving in on him. And another thing that should be talked about more is the league gave him a debt waiver that they allowed him to buy out his partners with a $450 million loan. But that loan was due in 5 years. And Snyder would have had to get a partner to come on, a silent partner, in order to be able to afford to pay off that loan, and he wasn't going to get one. And so it really pushed him into a corner, and he had to sell the team. Then he talks about this game against Miami. Remember this? This was Week 6 of the 2019 season. Washington got its first victory of the year, 17-16, under interim coach Bill Callahan. But it was helped by the fact that Kenyon Drake dropped Ryan Fitzpatrick's two-point conversion with 6 seconds left, and the Commanders held on to win. Had he caught that pass, then they lose that game, and then they're in position to take Joe Burrow instead of Chase Young. Now, I think it's still reasonable to think that Ron Rivera was hired under the premise that he was going to try and fix Dwayne Haskins. So I think it's entirely possible that Ron Rivera would have taken Chase Young at number 1, and Joe Burrow would have wound up at Cincinnati at number 2 anyway. I think that's the way it would have worked out. But Barry speculates, had Burrow come here, they might have been good enough for maybe Ron Rivera to stay. I don't necessarily buy that, but we had the calling of the role of the quarterbacks in the next few years, Dwayne Haskins to Taylor Heineke, Sam Howell, Carson Wentz, Alex Smith, who came back miraculously from that broken leg, Kyle Allen. Garrett Gilbert played 1 game. That was a COVID game. That was only because Heineke couldn't go, so he did fill in for 1 game. And then Ryan Fitzpatrick had 16 snaps. Another bad thing that happened. Snyder hired Ron Rivera only to not only to coach the team, but to oversee personnel matters. Well, we know what a disaster that was with all of his draft picks essentially not working out. He says, granting Rivera such complete authority put further scrutiny on Snyder's ineptness. It produced a flimsy NFC East title with a 7-9 record and the pandemic-ravaged 2020 season in an overall record of 26-40-1. The best way to capture the treading water nature of the Rivera era, he inherited the number 2 pick in the draft. 4 years later, he left behind the number 2 pick. What about the and then there was this, and this may have been the tipping point, maybe not. I don't think it was necessarily the tipping point, but it may have pushed the Snyders in this direction to finally give up. When Tanya Snyder appeared in a cancer awareness video message that was played at FedEx Field early in the 2023 season, she was greeted with a mixture of boos and chants, "Sell the team." And it could have been a family discussion like, do we really need this anymore? But whatever it was, less than 2 weeks after the game, they announced that they were exploring a sale of the team. That was a big, big moment here. Didn't necessarily mean they were going to sell it, but finally it looked like we were going to be rid of Dan Snyder. More bad things that happened. Rivera and company used the 16th pick in the 2023 draft on Emmanuel Forbes, a cornerback, and then Jets kicker Greg Zuerlein nailed a 54-yard field goal with 5 seconds left in Week 16 of the 2023 season. That sent Washington to the 6th of what would become 8 straight losses to end the season. Had he not made that kick, maybe they're not in position to take Jayden Daniels, and who knows. So, those things add up, and maybe not. But I think this sale was going to happen anyway. Whether they had the number 2 pick or not, you can add up all those other things and leading it to the number 2 pick, and that's why they have Jayden Daniels here. But reality is, I don't think with all these what-ifs that Dan Snyder would still be the owner of the team. I think there was just too much pressure from the league, from the outside, from the fact he couldn't get a partner. It was just going to happen. So here we are, and we got one here. This is what you always say in the NFL draft. Can you get one? And it's pretty clear they got one here. Vic Fangio, longtime defensive coordinator around the league, had a 3-year run as head coach of the Broncos. He's been in and out of Philly a couple of times as the defensive coordinator, back now, and answering this question at his news conference as they prepare to face the Commanders on Sunday.
Jayden Daniels is obviously a young quarterback, and you saw him just last month, but he's played in his first postseason games. I mean, in that small amount of time, has he changed?
He's a young quarterback by birth certificate, not by the tape. The guy's playing extremely well. You could tell how much they think he's playing so good by the volume of their offense and the things they trust him to do. And he's come through for them in a big way. And he's tough to handle.
You mentioned the volume. Is aside from the amount of plays that Cliff has and goes to, are there a lot of teams around the league that run a lot of what he does?
I'm sure there are, He has the added dimension of the gun-run game where he can have design runs for the quarterback, or he can pull it and keep it. That adds another level to an offense, and he excels at that. And I assume he was doing it in college, and it just comes natural to him.
That's Vic Fangio. They did face Jayden Daniels in November, okay? So they've got recent tape on him. I'd say this about him. And when he says he's young only in birth certificate, he's right about that. And not only that, he gets exponentially better week by week. The Jayden Daniels that we saw in week 1 doesn't look anything like the Jayden Daniels we see now. Remember his slides, those head first slides? Now he runs out of bounds. Occasionally he slides. Every once in a while he'll take a hit. He was taken off with the ball more than he should have. Now, he did run 16 times in this past game, and he ran 16 times in the opener, but they were different kinds of runs. And, yeah, I think Fangio, when he looks at the tape of the last time they played, and again, people will all say, well, Jalen Hurts got hurt and Kenny Pickett was the quarterback. Yeah, but he put up a lot of points on a defense that doesn't give up many points. And so that is something that they have to look at and say, we're going to have our hands full with him more so than we did in the game in Washington back in November. So that's Fangio as he goes back to the tape room and figures out a way to stop Jayden Daniels. The one thing that's really encouraging from the last game, they had the running game back. That was big. And with Austin Eckler, I think that makes a big difference. Brian Robinson had like 70-some yards. And if they've got the running game to go along with the short passing game and the continual conversions on fourth down, they keep the ball out of the Eagles' hands, and they keep the ball from Saquon Barkley and running over him. That is going to be the big thing to watch, and long, sustained drives are what they're going to have to do against Vic Fangio's defense. Now, this was on the podcast that Kyle Clark, I think his name is Kyle Clark, he does it on ESPN. He's part of Around the Horn. It's one of these football podcasts, and he had Kyle Long on. Now, you're familiar with Howie Long. He's got another son, Chris Long, does a lot of TV, and Kyle Long is a former Bears offensive lineman. Chris Long was a defensive end, and the brother Kyle played at Oregon, became an outstanding guard for the Chicago Bears. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler, and then finished up his career with the Kansas City Chiefs in 2021. He does TV on the CBS Sports Network, and he was on the Clark podcast yesterday, and here's his observations of Jayden Daniels with kind of some inside information from a couple of former buddies he played with in Kansas City.
I've noticed that he's a guy that is a 20-year vet between the ears. He has what Orlovsky described in the pre-draft process as pocket peace, which I really feel like is, with all of the positives that he has, his deep ball, his ability to run, his understanding of leveraging second-level defenders when running the football. It's the thing that stands out to most is he is cool as a cucumber. Yep. And I got a couple buddies who are on that offensive line, Nick Allegretti, Andrew Wiley. Shout out to my boys. They've been kicking ass all year. They're going to the NFC Championship. I'm so freaking stoked for those guys because you think you leave Kansas City and the party's over. Yep. But the party has just begun seemingly for these guys because they hitched onto a damn good wagon. I texted Nick Allegretti early in the season. And I was like, what? Because I'm a Bears fan,
of course.
And I read all the Twitter about Caleb and Jayden, and you guys got the wrong guy. And I think both teams probably got the right guy. We were never in a position to win this year as the Bears. But for Jayden Daniels, I texted Nick and I said, what's the deal? And he said, this guy 5. First off, he said, this guy 5. And anytime you refer to a player by their number, it's a compliment. It's kind of like that subversive machismo. Like you call him 5. It's like 18, Peyton Manning, 12, Andrew Luck. You know what I'm saying? He said, this guy 5 is special, period. Stop. And you watch him play. You watch the way that the defense has elevated their play. Dan Quinn has instilled belief in this team, and the catalyst for that belief has been like, oh, yeah, you don't believe me? Watch this sucker we got at quarterback. And from the very beginning, it's been foot to the gas pedal. And you wonder when he was going to hit the rookie wall. He didn't. He scaled it, and he ascended even higher in the performance category. So it's the defense stepping up. It's the offensive line understanding that they have greatness behind them. And that extra second of blocking can thrust your offense into a highlight level play. I mean, the Hail Mary against Chicago Bears was unbelievable. The Michael Penix versus Jayden Daniels battle in primetime was remarkable. It's not one I'll soon forget. It just feels like time after time the guy makes plays, and it's so much fun to watch. But it starts with between the ears. The dude is mature. He was experienced in college. He was asked to leave at Arizona State, essentially. They emptied his locker out. I can't imagine what that does to a psyche for a young man trying to play quarterback for a living. And we can see that he turned it into a positive.
I was kind of curious about that last statement. I hadn't heard that Arizona State cleaned out Jayden Daniels' locker. I'll have to do some more work on that, some more noodling around the internet to find out. That seems odd. He was a starting quarterback? They were sending a message, we wanted you out of there? I know he wanted to leave, and he wound up at LSU, played 2 years there. That I find kind of curious. But players know. That's the thing. And there's a story that Tony Kornheiser often tells about Desmond Howard. Desmond Howard was the 4th pick of the draft by the Redskins after they won the Super Bowl. They had 2 number 1s, and they moved up to 4 by trading both of them to take Desmond Howard, who turned out to be a really good kick returner, but couldn't get off the line of scrimmage. Too small. Not a good receiver, not worthy of the number 4 pick. And Tony went to a mini camp, his first mini camp. It would have been, I guess, somewhere in the 92 spring. And he talked to a couple of veterans. One of them was Jeff Bostic, been around for a long time. And he said, well, what do you think of the rookie? And they said, can't play. He says, well, can't play now? No. Can't play in the league. So here's Kyle Long texting guys he played with, like Nick Allegretti, and saying, oh, yeah, this guy is special. And Nick Allegretti, used to block for Patrick Mahomes. So I found that to be really telling, that players know. And Kyle Long, who played on the offensive line in Kansas City with Andrew Wiley and with Nick Allegretti, can text them, and they can speak a different language than we do. And they're saying to him, oh, yeah, number 5 is special. They knew this in training camp. And what have we learned throughout the year? Coming up, ESPN has put out an absurd poll about D.C. area athletes. I will get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Big part of the national sports conversation is, Jesus, every time Patrick Mahomes gets touched, there's a penalty. Clearly, the refs are favoring the Kansas City Chiefs. And Mike Pereira used to be the head of officiating, now the Fox expert on rules, was on the Rich Eisen show yesterday to refute that, and we will get to that shortly. But I did just see this on Twitter, and it made me angry. And look, I'm too young to have seen Walter Johnson pitch. I think his last year was 1927. I'm too young to have seen Sammy Baugh play. His last year was 1952. I was born after both of those guys had retired, long after. Well, not as long for Baugh. But anyway, this poll that was put out, I don't even know if it's a poll. It's put out by ESPN Bet. So it's not something you can bet on because it's subjective. But the question is, who is DC's GOAT? And they give you 6 choices. GOAT, I guess, means greatest athlete of all time. And you have to do it, per sport. How can you compare basketball and hockey and football and all that? But they give you 6 choices from 6 different sports. Number 1 choice, Wes Unseld. Wes Unseld, in my mind, is the greatest bullet/wizard ever. He was the MVP of the finals in 1978. He was a great, great player, turned around the fortunes of the franchise when they were in Baltimore. When he was drafted in 1968, he was both Rookie of the Year and MVP. The only other player to have done that is Wilt Chamberlain. Alex Ovechkin, as he closes in on Wayne Gretzky's record, obviously he's the best hockey player we've ever had in this town. Soccer's not my thing, but they list Jaime Moreno of D.C. United as the best soccer player. The best football player, Darryl Green. I love Darryl Green. Darryl Green played 20 years here. He was a great, great player. First ballot Hall of Famer, for sure. Okay. Best Redskin ever? Don't know about that. Elena Deladon, best women's basketball player here? Sure. She led the Mystics to their title. And Ryan Zimmerman as the best baseball player here. Well, Zimmerman's not going to the Hall of Fame. Max Scherzer is. He's homegrown. these others, I guess that's the criteria here, that they're homegrown. Okay, I'll give you that. Although technically Unseld is not, since he was drafted in Baltimore, but he was drafted by the franchise, played his whole career here. Elena Delle Donne, though, was traded for, but I guess there aren't a lot of choices for women's basketball. Ryan Zimmerman, the first pick of the franchise after they moved from Montreal in 2005, and Darryl Green, who was taken in the first round in 1983 after they had won their first Super Bowl. And again, a 20-year run is incredible. But, I mean, does everything have to be limited to the Sports Center era? This is put out by ESPN Bet. I don't know if they encourage you to bet on this or maybe bet on the results of a poll. I don't know how that works. But Walter Johnson was arguably the best pitcher who ever lived. He had over 400 wins. He had 110 shutouts. He played mostly for bad teams. He won one World Series. Okay. But there's no comparison between Ryan Zimmerman and Walter Johnson, who, if you want to use the criteria of playing for one team your whole career, Walter Johnson fits that. Did he play in the Sports Center era? No. But you can only do what you can do in the area you play in. Walter Johnson wasn't playing at the same time Ryan Zimmerman was. He was long dead at that point. And then for football, I do love Darryl Green. Sammy Baugh was drafted by the franchise right after they had moved from Boston to Washington in 1937. And while I believe Jayden Daniels is going to match this, he was a rookie quarterback who led the Redskins to the championship. Okay, it wasn't the Super Bowl era. There was no television. You know, no social media, obviously. But he did it. In the period that he played in, he was the best player in the league. And when they named the best player of the first half of the 20th century, 1950, the best pro player, I don't know if they had a college category for this, but the best pro player of the first half of the 20th century, Sammy Baugh. So you want to do these polls, and maybe you can asterisk it with only in the Super Bowl era, only in the post, I don't know what. I mean, the athlete that really, I guess, goes back the furthest would be Wes from 1968, last century, almost mid-20th century. But please, you know, consider that sports actually existed. They did exist before Sports Center. And if you want to have a poll that has an active player on it, in Ovechkin, I guess Elena Delle Donne is still active, and the oldest of the group, going back to 68 with Wes Unseld, go ahead. But please, when you look at the history of DC sports, do not forget that they existed in a period of time before everything was on television. It's just, it's maddening. Okay, let me get to this controversy over Patrick Mahomes. And you know, I'm watching the Houston game, and the two roughing the passer penalties, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. One of them, he's dancing around, and he falls down. He's barely touched, and they call roughing. And there is now this perception, oh, yeah, the NFL wants the Chiefs. Chiefs are good for ratings. Dynasties are good. You know, the same way, you know, Michael Jordan could palm the ball and travel and not get called for it. Everything he does is okay. And Ryan Clark, who is an analyst for ESPN, he also does Inside the NFL and a variety of other things. He was on the Dan Patrick Show the other day. And, yeah, I mean, he says there's no getting around this perception that Mahomes is getting preferential treatment.
The one that pained me the most was when he's running around. He doesn't really slide. He just kind of gives himself up, and these guys are trying to tackle him. He's playing freaking dipsy-do with the linebacker on the outside and jumping around and cutting back in and holding the football. You can't call that. You can't give them 15 yards, and you can't give them an extra set of downs, and they end up scoring a touchdown on that drive that essentially makes it a 2-score game. Those calls have to be reviewable. If you don't want to review them during the season, that's fine. But you can't put a team like the Houston Texans that's scrapping and scraping and clawing to stay in the game with the 2-time defending Super Bowl champions in that sort of situation, to where you can visibly see DeMeco Ryans biting his tongue after the game to not say he felt cheated.
I don't know if this analogy works for you, but later in Floyd Mayweather's career, it wasn't about trying to knock you out. He was just going to play defense. He would outsmart you. Patrick Mahomes is not blowing you away with stats. This isn't 45, 50 touchdown passes. It's I'm just going to kind of spar with you. And then you're going to make one or two mistakes. You leave Kelsey open. We're going to score. You know, my defense is really the calling card of this team. I don't know if you see that, but I was kind of feeling like Mahomes at times doesn't seem like he's like, oh, I got to worry. It's, you know, those times when I do have to worry, then he always delivers.
Yeah, I think that's the key with him right now. This man has shown up so many times in critical situational football moments that he expects to, his team expects him to, hell, the other team expects him to. And when we saw him get into trouble was trying to relive those 45, 50 touchdown days without having 45, 50 touchdown people to throw it to. You know, and I think he's had to make that adjustment. I mean, Dan, you know, like we all have an ego, right? Like we all feel like we're good at certain things and we want to be sort of seen and perceived that way. And for Patrick Mahomes, he was perceived and seen as the best quarterback on earth. And you want to be able to push the ball down the field. You want to be able to show those skills. But right now, that's not the way they can win football games. And ultimately, as you begin to win football games and you're no longer having sort of the statistical output that you used to have, but people are still saying, yeah, but you're the guy, right? Yeah, he won't win the MVP this year, but everybody's chasing him. You start to realize that actually winning's more important than anything, and that's what he's doing.
So that's the view of a former defensive player, Ryan Clark. Maybe there's something to that, but I generally agree with what he said. Now, yesterday, Mike Pereira, who used to be the head of officiating for the NFL, now the rules expert for Fox, I think he does a really good job. He was on the Rich Eisen show. And this was put to him like, hey, you know, Mike, the fan base and everything you see on social media, or a lot of it is, hey, you know, Patrick Mahomes is getting preferential treatment here. The league wants Patrick Mahomes back in the Super Bowl. Not surprisingly, this is how Pereira responds to that.
The fact that you're looking out for anyone, any team, any individual is a myth. It is an absolute myth. You don't have time to react and say, this is Goff. I'm not going to call this because it's Goff. This is Mahomes. I'm got to call this because it's Mahomes. This is Rice. I remember when I got hired by the NFL, my dad's first thing he said to me was, don't screw the 49ers. and I said, Dad, how am I going to screw the 49ers? He said, well, you know, if Rice gets them, make sure it's a catch on the sideline. And I'm like, Dad, it is literally boom, boom. You don't have time. Mm-hmm. You don't have time to process. It's like 1/26th of a second. You have to see a flash and then make a determination. And you don't have time. And the other thing is, you don't want to get fired. You just want to be right. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's the other myth, the makeup call. A makeup call. So even if I knew I was wrong with the call I made, if I make another bad one to make up for the other team, I'm done. I mean, I'm probably out of playoff contentions with two mistakes in one game. So it doesn't bother me because those people that say that don't know a damn thing about officiating. And until you actually put the uniform on and until you have to make those quick judgments, and that includes people in the media who can be quick to criticize. If you haven't done it and you don't recognize how hard it is in real time and how easy it is in super slow motion, then get out of my train, get off my train. I mean, period. That's why. Does it anger me? No, I don't think it really angers me. It just kind of validates my point that people don't understand how difficult it is.
Well, that's why I wanted to start with this conversation, because our conversation this way, because that's the national conversation coming out of Chiefs and Texans, coming off of two calls. One in which Mahomes gets to stay on the field because Will Anderson is called for roughing, and another one where Mahomes is, as Troy Aikman described it, playing games with the defense by staying in bounds and then moving back into the field to slide. Two Texans collide with each other, and they're called for colliding into each other, essentially. Should those penalties have been called in your estimation?
No, I don't think they should have been. I mean, I look at the game and I judge things a little bit differently, and it probably wouldn't make sense to anybody. But I used to grade officials, so I would grade them.
Right.
And if they made a call they shouldn't have made, you get what's called an incorrect call, which is very difficult. And then, I look at things and say no calls. That's when you pass on something. And if you pass on something that you should have called, then you get what's called a no call. Both of those, in my opinion, should have been passed on. I understand why they were called, because we are in a time of protection of quarterbacks and pretty much everybody. But when the league came out and said they defended them, right? They did say they defended both calls. That doesn't mean they wanted them called.
So then they're defending it just because why? I mean,
they defend it because, you and I went through this thing. I mean, I probably bent over backwards because they were my people to defend it. And technically, it could be a foul. But in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, while I see there is some contact, high contact on the roughing the passer one. Was it like forcible? No, it really wasn't forcible enough. I see why it was called. It's certainly not, a phantom. And in the other one, maybe a little contact, but it's not. Listen, if you were, in my opinion,
yes,
if I was sitting with Walt Anderson and he and I were having a beer, if he and I were having a vodka,
nice.
Actually, I think he would say to me, we actually would have preferred, even though technically it's a foul, that it wasn't.
Okay. Look, it's perception. Here's the issue. The issue is they have the technology to stop this nonsense. Now, you could say, like in the Lions playoff game last Saturday, that things evened out. Frankie Louvu clearly roughed Goff on what turned out to be a pick six. That should have come back. But there was also, later in the game, a face mask call on the Commanders, which kept the Lions' drive alive and resulted in a touchdown. Both of those could be easily fixed with the eye in the sky. We see it at home. There's somebody upstairs watching the feed and can immediately signal down to the referees on the field, wait a minute, we got another look at this, and we determined there was no face mask, and, sorry, but you missed what was blatant. I mean, it wasn't even close on Frankie Louvu. That was a terrible, terrible call. Jared Goff got dinged up so much he had to leave the game. Now they got a touchdown out of it with Teddy Bridgewater, who just coached his former high school to the state championship. Wow. Just had come back to the Lions, came back, and then they had a long touchdown run to score. But, Mike Pereira, I think he does an excellent job with Fox and really has style and the ability to be conversational and explain things. But, we're at a point now where there are so many cameras, so many close-ups, that nothing is ever missed by TV. And most people consume the product at home. It's a television product. And we should have the ability as fans to watch this and have them get it right. If you're going to use replay, use it properly. And the two calls that were made on Mahomes, they're trying to defend them. Oh, come on. I mean, it wasn't even close. And to the credit of Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, they blasted the referees for those. That you can't have Patrick Mahomes dancing around there and then fall down and somebody breathes on him and it's a roughing the passer. You can't have that. So I do respect Mike Pereira. I understand his job is also to protect the referees, but it's time they get it right. And they have this in college. They can review everything, and they should have that in the NFL. That when you have these calls that are egregiously wrong, and then we get the word, oh, sorry, that's not reviewable. Bull crap. You can review everything. make sure you get it right. And those were two that I referenced in the Washington game, which should have gone the other way. All right, next hour, Kyle Brandt of the NFL Network says, oh, you like what Washington's doing? Give it a try. We'll get to that next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. It is the most famous call in the history of boxing, and it took place 52 years ago today. Howard Cosell with the George Foreman knockout of Joe Frazier, and the way it's entered the lexicon and the way it endures for a sport that's pretty much non-existent. I mean, it's, really remarkable what has happened to boxing over the last 50 years, but 52 years ago today, there was no bigger sporting event than that. And the Cosell call endures. We'll look back on that fight, and we'll also talk more, of course, about the Commanders as they're heading into this game on Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles. It still feels a little weird, though, I must say, to say Commanders. It's been Redskins my whole life. I understand why the name was changed. They'll never go back to Redskins. That's not going to happen. My feeling is they should go back to Washington Football Team and just be unique that way. Commanders was a silly rollout by an organization that was, falling over itself. I was watching Craig Melvin on the Today Show. He's taken over for Savannah Guthrie. And I was thinking about, how he feels about being part of that ridiculous dog and pony show that we had in March of 2022. Remember 2222? When the big rollout of the name that they spent 2 years trying to figure out. And they had Doug Williams with Jason Wright, the team president, the outgoing team president now, and Craig Melvin, and the name was revealed. And then on the steps of the stadium in front of the team store where they were selling all kinds of merchandise, Dan and Tanya Snyder in those silly-looking Letterman's jackets telling you how great the Commanders are. I got an email from somebody who said, I don't care if the team goes 0-17 for the next 10 years. I'd rather see them change the name back to Redskins. Look, they're winning. It's an organization that is on the right track now. And the question really is, if they win the Super Bowl, and I think they will, as insane as that seems, if they win the Super Bowl as the Commanders, do you change the name? I don't know. I don't think you do. But they've got it right otherwise. So whatever you think of the name, everything else that they've done has smelled like roses. I mean, to be in this position, to be one of the final four teams, when they went into the season with the same odds for wins as the Tennessee Titans, who are picking number one, the over-under for wins was 6.5, and they now have 14 wins? Yeah, 14 wins. They're 14-5. That's remarkable. And, every other team around the league that's not playing at this point, the other, we got 4 teams left, so the other 28 organizations are all looking at this and saying, how can we do this? Is there a formula here that was used by Washington? Kyle Brandt, who I think does really good work for the NFL Network, I think he's a Bears fan, his take on this is, no, you can't do what Washington did.
I see the Washington example of changing everything as the false god of changing everything. I see it as if you're trying to do what Washington's doing, it's like you're chasing waterfalls. I think you're fooling yourself. Mostly important because if you are a downtrodden franchise, you are not going to change owners. That is almost definitely not going to happen. And that is a massive, massive part of what happened to Washington. I don't think if the prior regime and ownership is still there, we're having this conversation. I certainly don't think they're playing this weekend, and I have decades of experience to show it. You're not going to change owners. It's almost definitely not going to happen, so you're not going to have that benefit. Also, I think that Jayden Daniels is an anomaly. I don't think he's just the next cool young quarterback. I don't think there'll be a Jayden Daniels in this draft or the next draft or the one after that. And I've talked about this a lot, is that he's not only doing exceptional things as a rookie in the playoffs, winning 2 road games, he's doing it in a way that no rookie quarterback has ever done. And you can talk about Roethlisberger or Sanchez or Flacco. Those guys had insane lights-out, sometimes all-time historic defenses, which Jayden Daniels does not. I don't think he is just a cool young quarterback. I don't think you're going to get Jayden Daniels. So those teams are outliers. I don't think you're going to get him. Also, I don't think Dan Quinn grows on trees. Yeah. I don't think there is a plug-and-play Dan Quinn out there. Remember this. Find me another coach who has an historic meltdown in the Super Bowl that would break most coaches and most human beings, and the next year has that team back in the divisional round of the playoffs. I am almost at this point, we're so far removed from 28-3, I almost am looking at it as a positive for Dan Quinn because I'm so impressed that he recovered from it. It's incredible. It really is that happened. So, to those teams, I would also love to give you a message of hope, especially on a day when the Bears hire a new coach, and maybe the Jets will as well. And maybe you will. But don't, in my opinion, look at Washington and say, we can also do that. Not like that, you can't. You may find a way, but you're not going to have a new owner, you're not going to have Jayden Daniels, and you're probably not going to have Dan Quinn. So look elsewhere. Sorry to be a skeptic, but look at the Commanders. You can't do that.
Yeah,
you can't.
The Dan Quinn part of it is interesting because Ben Johnson did, in fact, get hired by the Chicago Bears yesterday. So he's there, and he's got his quarterback in Caleb Williams that he can develop after a year of some rockiness. Though, if you look at the Caleb Williams stats, they really weren't too bad this year. I mean, he didn't play that poorly. The team just lost a whole bunch of games and fired the offensive coordinator and fired the coach and the whole deal. But if Ben Johnson decides to come here last year, I don't think you have this culture change. And you don't have Cliff Kingsbury because Ben Johnson, I bet, would have been the play caller here. That's what he did well in Detroit, and I don't know if he'd turn it over to somebody else. So I think Kingsbury's had a lot to do with the success there. And Quinn has changed the culture, and the point that Kyle Brandt makes, it's not something you really think about, and they really haven't talked about it, but that is the all-time Super Bowl meltdown. I know it was against Brady, but you just don't blow a 28-3 lead with your owner, Arthur Blank, down on the sidelines dancing and celebrating what he thought was a Super Bowl victory. And Quinn, talks about how you have to go through these tough periods of time to get to the point where you are now, or the euphoria of, oh, my God, we're in the NFC Championship game. But you also don't treat it like, oh, my God, okay, next game. What are we going to do? How are we going to get ready? What do we need to do? What do we need to look at? He's done all that. So they were really done a favor last year by Ben Johnson not taking the job. I don't think they're in this position with him. I really don't. He would have to have some growing pains as a head coach, which Quinn had already been through. That's the point Brandt makes. He went through that with the horrific meltdown that they had in the Super Bowl. And to bring them back the way, and this is, it's not quite what Marv Levy did. I've always admired what Marv Levy did with the Buffalo Bills, making it to 4 straight Super Bowls. That's incredible. And he lost all 4, didn't win any of them. But the devastation of losing a Super Bowl and getting off the mat 3 times to get back, that's amazing. And what Dan Quinn did, he did ultimately lose his job. I think they were 1-5 or something like that when he lost his job in Atlanta. But he's done all the right things since. He asked for an evaluation of what he did right and what he did wrong from his former players. He hired Laura Oakman to talk to a bunch of people, and he wanted all the criticism. And here we are right now. And so Brandt's right. Kyle Brandt is right. They couldn't duplicate it even if you tried. More on the great Jayden Daniels train, and wait till you hear the nickname that Dominique Foxworth says is being thrown around in these parts. If you don't know, Foxworth was a cornerback at the University of Maryland, really good player on those early Ralph Friedgen teams that won 10 games 3 straight years, and then he played in the NFL with Baltimore and with Denver. A pretty good defensive back, and he's transitioned into being a really good contributor to ESPN. He writes, he hosts a podcast, he goes on TV, really smart analysis from him. We've had him on here on the Ravens preview. And he was on yesterday on our morning show on Sportsmanlike. And this was with Greeny yesterday. Mike Greenberg about to turn over that show. And Greenberg was saying, nothing new here. A lot of people saying this, that Jayden Daniels has put together the best rookie season in the history of quarterbacking in the NFL. There's never been a rookie quarterback that's been this good. Foxworth with his input on that.
So if you're expecting some pushback. I live in D.C. You're not going to get it from me.
Yeah.
Like what
they must be losing their minds.
Absolutely losing their minds. The way that they're talking about this Eagles game and the way that I heard them talking about the Lions game was like they were the favorites. Like they've been running through people. Jayden Daniels, they call him Jesus in some circles. Though the type of belief that he's given this franchise and the fans is absurd. And so, I mean, what he's done is not just the way that it's affected the fan base, it's the way it's affected the team. You go down that roster, there's not a bunch of guys that you want either side. Like no one's beating down the door. Terry McLaurin might be the next big name. I mean, Allen was great on a D line. He's still very good, but Terry McLaurin, if you rank the receivers, like I don't know, he's 9, 10 by the time.
I think that would be
that's being
high.
generous. Yeah. So like that's. My producer you mentioned earlier, Charlie, is like he's throwing to a guy named Zach and Diami. It's like It's not guys. They're not household names.
The thing about what he has done is he has made like really, really great analysts completely confused. Yeah. Because like Damian Woody said something that I thought was an obvious statement of fact on Get Up yesterday when he said, well, of all the quarterbacks in the playoffs right now, he's playing the best. This was not a statement about his career. This was not in any way to compare him, nor would any sane person to Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, guys who've been doing it for a long time, but to state just very simply, over the last couple of weeks, he's playing better than anybody. And Alex Smith and Dan Orlovsky lost their minds. Yeah. And they're giving me, have you seen what Mahomes is doing? Patrick Mahomes threw for 130 yards in the game the other day. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Jayden, he is definitely playing the best.
I cornered Dan this morning when I told him, like, if Patrick put up these numbers, would you say, and Jayden put up the numbers that Patrick's putting up, would you say that Jayden Daniels was having the best? Like, no. Obviously, you would say the guy who's putting up the big numbers and outscoring offenses because his defense can't stop him converting major fourth downs, like dotting people on deep balls all over the field. Like that's the guy that's having the best playoff run so far. And to your point, if you want to start ranking these top 5 greatest rookie seasons, it's hard when you throw a quarterback in the mix because they're so damn valuable.
Yeah, it used to be that running backs were really what you were after. So, I mean, hard to tell. But the whole package, they're in the NFC Championship game with a rookie. He's the 5th rookie quarterback to start a championship game. But the others who got there, they got there on the backs of great defense and running games. This team got there on the back of a rookie who, we'll see if it catches on, Jesus, not sure. But, that's pretty funny that nickname has picked up. You probably heard this, that they're putting the band back together in New England, that the next athletic director is reported by The Athletic first. The next offensive coordinator is the offensive coordinator from 2 terms back, Josh McDaniels. Well, he got a president making a comeback, second term after missing one. Josh McDaniels is now beating him. He's back in New England for the 3rd time, as Mike Vrabel has expected to announce that he will be the offensive coordinator. He was with the Patriots as the OC from 2006 to 2008, and again from 2012 to 2021. He became the Raiders coach. Was fired midway through the 2023 season. In between the first and second stints, he was the head coach of the Denver Broncos. Apparently, he's one of those guys who's a really good coordinator, not a good head coach. And now he's back in New England where he's got a lot of familiarity. They were terrible last year. Alex Van Pelt was the offensive coordinator, and they had an offense that was 31st in the NFL and points 30th. So they were at the bottom. Of course, McDaniels did work with Tom Brady, and I believe was his last season in New England. He had Brady, but certainly the second to last season, I believe he did, or maybe not. I don't know. But now he's got. We'll see. We'll see what Drake May does with his offense. He was pretty good last year, even with the horrible statistics they had. Once he got his chance to play after Jacoby Brissett started the season, got benched, he looks like he's pretty competent, and we'll see what he develops with Josh McDaniels. And I don't know how to feel about this. I felt bad for Mark Andrews when he dropped the 2-point conversion in Buffalo on Sunday, and he is, as far as I know, has not spoken to the media yet. But the Buffalo Bills fans have done a really good thing. They have donated a lot of money to a charity that he supports. He has he was diagnosed as having type 1 diabetes as a child, so he deals with that. And they have raised, I think, over $35,000 from the Bills Mafia to support that charity. So that's a good thing. It's they put up a GoFundMe page, and they are giving lots of money to that, which is nice. Now, the Bills fans are happy that Andrews dropped the pass, of course, because now they go to the AFC Championship game on Sunday in Kansas City. But, turning a negative into a positive, pretty good thing. They set out an original goal of $5,000, and they've blown past that, I think, at more than $35,000. And they say that more than 1.6 million people suffer from type 1 diabetes, not type 2, but type 1 diabetes. So, you can say what you want about these people who do crazy things like jump on folding tables and break them and so forth, but good for them for raising that kind of money for a very worthy charity and turning something that is, I'm sure, very, very difficult for Mark Andrews to deal with. Again, he hasn't talked about it since it happened, and they at least are supporting something that he supports. Down goes Frazier, 52 years ago today. And what's this? Nachos on the ice? We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Rams coming up at 11 o'clock. Guess who's refereeing the NFC Championship game on Sunday? Sean Hockley. Sean Hockley was the lead official in the game at New Orleans on December 15th. Remember, the Saints had no timeouts. They got to the 1-yard line of Washington, trailing 20-13, and the clock, for whatever reason, was stopped for 4 seconds after Foster Moreau was tackled inbounds. And that allowed the Saints enough time to get to the line and spike the ball with 3 seconds left. I'm not good at math, but if there were 4 seconds that should have been counted off the clock and they spiked it with 3, game could have been over. They didn't have any timeouts left. They got the touchdown, but they failed on the 2-point conversion and held on to win. Washington won 20-19. Hockley later admitted that there was an error. He said the covering official mistakenly stopped the clock at 9 seconds. It's not reviewable. And Dan Quinn said, well, those seconds are critical. In a game, I was frustrated, but in the moment, I don't get to ask, and you don't get any feedback from the ref. They just say, well, it's not reviewable on that. So at least maybe he'll get the clock right, but it'll be Sean Hockley on the field when the Commanders play the Eagles on Sunday. It was 52 years ago today, and boy, if you don't remember how big boxing was, I don't know how well you can relate to this, but when I was growing up in the 1970s, and I've said this so many times, and we're coming up on an anniversary of that, I think it's March 8th. Yeah, March 8th was the first Ali Frazier fight. And I can't remember anything that had that kind of hype going into it, and I can't remember something that surpassed the hype. It was a classic fight. Frazier knocked down Ali in the 15th round. Ali got up. They don't have 15 rounds anymore. And Frazier won on a decision. It was the first time that Ali had ever lost. I thought he was invincible. And then that led to the trilogy of the fight with Ali winning the next 2. But in between fight number 1 and fight number 2, on this day in 1973, it was Joe Frazier against George Foreman, billed as the Sunshine Showdown, taking place in Kingston, Jamaica. And Frazier was undefeated. He went into the Ali fight undefeated. Ali was undefeated. That was part of the hype that went into it. But Frazier was clearly damaged in that fight. I mean, he took a beating. He won the fight, but he probably was never really the same. And over the next couple of years, he didn't do much to defend his title. He fought Terry Daniels, who was a former SMU football player, hurt his knee. He won that fight. I remember it was the night before the Super Bowl. And then he faced somebody by the name of Ron Stander, who was a real journeyman guy. He was from Council Bluffs, Nebraska, went by the moniker Bluffs Butcher. He took care of them easily. While Foreman, who had won the gold medal at the 68 Olympics, fought. He had 37 wins in 4 years, not necessarily against great fighters, but people knew who George Foreman was, and he was big. He was like 6'3". He was strong. He was bigger and stronger than Frazier. And the fight went, well, kind of the way it matched up physically. It lasted only 2 rounds, with Foreman getting a technical knockout at 135 of the second round. But it was a TKO because of this knockdown, as Muhammad Ali is not there, I don't think. I don't think he's there. But his trainer was, Angelo Dundee. He's doing the commentary on the fight with Cosell, and he says, I think he hurt Joe Frazier. I think Joe Frazier is hurt, leading Cosell to make what is now considered to be the most famous call in the history of boxing 52 years ago today.
Angie Dundee, Ali's trainer, right next to me is saying it. You may hear him. Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! The heavyweight champion is taking the mandatory 8 count, and Foreman is as poised as can be in a neutral corner.
That is remarkable. He captured the feeling of everybody who was watching the fight on closed circuit. This was a period where very few people had cable TV, if at all. I mean, I think it started in 73 with HBO. So the way you would watch a fight like this, they would rebroadcast it the following Saturday on ABC. But if you wanted to see it live, you had to go to a movie theater to watch it. That's how they did these fights. And it wasn't cheap either. I mean, I think a movie then was like a couple of bucks, and it may have cost you $10 to go see the fight, which was a lot of money for people. But people went to see that, and they left seeing a classic fight with a classic call, as, again, it comes into only the second round, and Frazier had been knocked down 6 times or 5 times in this fight, and this was the final one.
Angie Dundee, Ali's trainer, right next to me is saying it. You may hear him. Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! The heavyweight champion is taking the mandatory 8 count, and Foreman is as poised as can be in a neutral corner.
And he becomes the new heavyweight champion. Ali is not the champion. He'd been dethroned by Frazier. Frazier now dethroned 2 years later by George Foreman. He would successfully defend his titles twice. He knocked out Jose Roman in the first round, September 1st, 1973, and then he knocked out Ken Norton. He would lose the title, though, and only his third defense of it. Only his third, and this is a classic fight, the Rumble in the Jungle, where Muhammad Ali does rope-a-dope for, I think, 8 rounds, and then finally Foreman falls down. He's dead tired. And Foreman fought a couple of other times, and then he disappeared. He was out of the ring for 10 years. And in one of the most remarkable comebacks in the history of any sport, at the age of 45, he knocked out Michael Moore 30 years ago, 1994. In the meantime, Frazier got back in the ring in July of 73. He beat Joe Bugner, and that set up the second fight. This is of the trilogy. This is the one that's not really remembered. They fought in January of 1974 at Madison Square Garden, same place as the first fight. Frazier lost by a decision. But the third fight, which took place in October of 1975, is the classic Thrilla in Manila. And as has been written by a number of people, in very, very stark terms, this was a battle almost to the death. Like, Ali traded in his future. The Parkinson's syndrome, which he died with, where he could barely speak, there's reason to believe that a lot of that was contributed into him by the Thrilla in Manila in 1975. You want to read something great? Sound and the Fury. Dave Kindred, who covered Ali his whole career, wrote a wonderful book about this, Sound and Fury by Dave Kindred, which came out, I don't know, probably 20 years ago. But that is a great, great book. All right, a couple of other things to finish up with. When I was a kid, if your mother didn't throw out your baseball cards and you went through them, they were worth some money. And, sometimes you'd go back after college, maybe these cards are 20, 30 years old and they're worth something. Doesn't work that way anymore. So there's a card that was put out, a one-of-a-kind card for National League Rookie of the Year Paul Skeens of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it has a patch from a game-worn jersey. And there's an 11-year-old kid in Los Angeles who bought the right pack of cards, and he has it. It's only a year old. I mean, Skeens was Rookie of the Year last year. The Pirates want this back. I have to look and see. Darren Ravel probably has the value of what it'd be worth. But this is what the Pirates are offering this kid if he gives back the card. Now, he lives in Los Angeles, so I don't know how much this is going to help him. But they're offering 2 tickets behind home plate at PNC Park for 30 years. 2 prime tickets behind the plate at PNC for the next 30 years, a meet and greet with Paul Skeens, and then a softball game for 30 people at PNC Park where players will participate in this. 2 autographed jerseys from Paul Skeens. His girlfriend, Skeens' girlfriend, LSU gymnast and influencer Livy Dunn, is offering the owner an opportunity to take in a game with her in a luxury suite at the ballpark during one of his starts. 11-year-old kid, while he might find her to be nice company, I don't think he would have, quite the interest that maybe an older person would. I don't know. But anyway, that's what's being offered. I think he want cash. He lives in Los Angeles. 2 tickets behind home plate, what that's going to be worth. But that's the way it works now. They put out cards intentionally knowing that they become valuable. It isn't like, you buy a pack of cards in 1952. Oh, that's good. I got a Mickey Mantle rookie card. I'll just put it in this box, and in, 50 years, it's going to be worth, $4 million or whatever it is. The Honus Wagner used to be the holy grail of cards. He was a non-smoker, and a tobacco company put out cards with his likeness on it, and he told them to stop, and that's why that's so valuable. So who knows? But that's amazing. A year-old card, and the Pirates are offering incredible amounts to get it back. So who knows what it's worth. I did not watch the Caps last night. I know they won. I did not know about this. Caps goalie Logan Thompson was distracted by a tray of cheese-covered nachos thrown on the ice while Oilers winger Corey Perry scored on him last night. Spencer Carberry said, well, that's a first. He wasn't too upset because the team won 3-2. But he said, I don't think I've ever seen a nachos on the ice National Hockey League game. It was less than 5 minutes into the third period. The Oilers skated into the Capital Zone, and the nachos were on the ice, and sure enough, Perry blasted a shot past the distracted Logan Thompson. It was 3-1 at the time. That cut it to 3-2, but he was able to get back on track and keep the puck out of the net for the rest of the night. Caps held on to win 3-2. Carberry said after the game, I didn't even notice them. Guys were yelling, there's nachos on the ice. I was like, I don't know, can we challenge that? There's Rule 63.5, which covers objects thrown on the ice and spectator interference. It states, in the event that objects are thrown on the ice that interfere with the progress of the game, the referee shall blow the whistle and stop the play, and the puck shall be faced off at a spot in the zone nearest the spot where the play was stopped. And I guess the feeling was that it didn't interfere. Perry, of course, said, I didn't even see them. I was focused on the play. Carberry said he didn't believe there was much the officials could have done. Thompson said he wasn't sure whether the rule book covered this, and he just, tried to play, couldn't keep him out of the net. He said, I saw the guy that threw them, wasn't too happy, but credit to him, he got a goal. Now, if they catch the guy, they got to throw him out of the arena, and I would think ban him for a period of time, certainly the rest of the season. Anyway, the Capitals are amazing right now. There's a story that I have to go through that was written on ESPN, but the gist of it is when Alex Ovechkin signed his last contract, which was 2 years ago, he knew he was going to be in a position to get to Wayne Gretzky's record. And he said, I don't want to be just a guy who's coming in on power plays here. He says, I want a team that's contending. And when I looked at this a couple of years ago, I'm not a hockey guy, but I said, well, if this is going to be all about getting Alex Ovechkin the record, how can they possibly have a team that is a contender? And he wanted to keep, some of the older players that he played with, like T.J. Oshie, and they bring these guys back on contracts, and they've been hurt, and his guys are not necessarily his guys anymore, but they got a good team and a good coach, and they have the best record in the league. They have 69 points, which is 4 more than the second best team, and you got to give a lot of credit to this organization. I mean, I'm critical of Ted, and he's got an embarrassment of a basketball team right now. I know it's part of the process, and if Cooper Flagg winds up here, maybe we all feel differently about this season. But they're completely unwatchable. They're 6-36. They shot 11 or 40 something from 3 last night. They're terrible. They're terrible. But the hockey team, which I expected to be at best meh, they're good. They're the best team in the league point-wise, and people are starting to perk up and say, wait a minute, this team could win the Stanley Cup. They're on a rough road trip. They got 10 days with 5 games on the West Coast. They're playing in Seattle tomorrow night. But really remarkable what they've done, and Ovechkin is 21 away. He'll continue that tomorrow night in Seattle. But a team that I thought was going to be all about Ovechkin is all about winning right now, and they're one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league at this point. We'll see once they get to the playoffs. They won the President's Cup before and flamed out, but much better than I expected. All right, that's it for me. Bram is coming up next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.